Countries around the world, like China, always like to make sure that foreigners do not get the right to communicate with their citizens. In fact, they treat their citizens like kindergarten students, unable to hear from any foreign critics of the government. And we, in the West, always say we're Democrats, and we don't allow that kind of thing to happen here. We believe in freedom of speech, and therefore we think that anybody should be allowed to express opinions. Well, of course, subject to hate laws, subject to human rights tribunal laws that forbid certain types of speech, and more we're getting to the point where we'll make it criminal if we don't like what you have to say. Well, that's happening, and we're resisting it. I speak against it all the time, and the Canadian Free Speech League, of which I'm general counsel, stands against that. But there's something more insidious happening in the so-called free world to make us more and more like China every day. What is that? Well, Britain, for instance, has now decided that notwithstanding that you haven't been prosecuted and convicted under any criminal law, notwithstanding that you haven't been declared sort of persona non grata by a human rights tribunal, we're going to create a list of people who have opinions and have expressed views in the past that we don't think that British people should be allowed to hear. And so they decide to name people who will be barred from Britain from coming in and speaking whatever they have to say. Now, of course, if they did come in and break the laws of Britain, they could be prosecuted like anybody else. But that's not good enough, because they probably wouldn't break those laws. And so what do? They make it impossible for the people of Britain to hear them and decide for themselves. I, as a human being with an intelligent mind, want to be able to hear for myself what it is someone else has to say before I make my judgment. And I don't want my government to tell me who I can hear before I can make my opinion known or make my my informed judgment upon any subject. So, what are you and I going to do? Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about this issue. Britain has created a list of names of 22 people who are barred. The purpose of this list is to make sure that they don't come to the United Kingdom and speak. That's all. If they spoke, they could be heard. If they were heard, they could be surveilled. If they could be surveilled, they could be prosecuted if they said anything wrong. But that's not good enough. They want to make sure nobody hears them anyway. That's how governments control the public mind. That's how they present one and only one point of view, and they force people to believe it. And they make it impossible for you to hear anything else. Not in person anyway. That's how they banned George Galloway from coming to Canada. That's how they banned David Irving from going to Austria. And that's how they made every effort to imprison and incarcerate Mr. Tobin from Australia. And it's always so that people don't get to hear for themselves. We should, as Lord Randolph Churchill once said, properly informed, trust the people. Well, who can inform them? Who can inform them? Just their government? No. They have to inform themselves. I want to inform myself. I want you to be able to inform yourself. I don't want your government or my government telling me or any of us who we can hear before we can decide what we think. That's what democracy should mean. And that's why in Western Canada we have to free the West. And that's why I'm speaking out here now to try and help to educate you and me so we can stop our governments from creating tyranny and police states. That's why we have to also free the world.